Imagine it's September 2013. You're a 58-year-old civil engineer named Marek living in Warsaw, Poland. You've worked for 31 years. You've never missed a contribution. Every month, without exception, a portion of your salary has been deducted and deposited into your private pension account, an account managed by one of Poland's licensed open pension funds, the OFAs, established by the government in 1999 as part of a celebrated reform designed to give Polish workers ownership over their retirement savings. Real ownership, private accounts, your name on them. You have watched that account grow for 14 years. You have a statement. You have a fund manager. You have a number with your name attached to it. By September 2013, the balance represents the most significant financial asset you have ever accumulated. It is the proof that the system worked, that the sacrifice was worth it, that the decades of contributions made faithfully, month after month, meant something. On September 4th, 2013, the Polish government announces that it will transfer 51.5% of the assets held in private pension funds, approximately 153 billion zloty, equivalent to roughly $51 billion, into the state social security system. Your private account will be reduced by more than half. The assets will be moved to ZUS, the state pension administrator. You will receive a promise in return, a promise that the state will honor the obligation at retirement. You still have your statement. You still have your fund manager. Nothing looks different on the surface, but more than half of what you saved is gone. Transferred to a government that needed the money to reduce its official debt figures before a constitutional debt ceiling was triggered. It was completely legal. No one went to prison. No one was charged. The government held a parliamentary vote. It passed. The Constitutional Tribunal reviewed it. It was upheld. Every institution that was supposed to protect you reviewed what happened and confirmed that what happened was permitted. You lost half your retirement savings to a legal parliamentary maneuver designed to make a spreadsheet look better. And when you try to explain this to someone who doesn't follow Polish fiscal policy, they look at you like you're describing a conspiracy theory, because it doesn't sound like theft. It doesn't look like theft. It used the correct procedures. It followed the proper channels. It was announced in a press release. That is the mechanism. That is the thing almost nobody understands until it has already happened to them. This is not a story about Poland. Poland is simply the most recent, most cleanly documented example of something that has happened in dozens of countries across every continent over the past 100 years. The names change. The legal frameworks change. The specific mechanisms change. But the outcome does not change. When a government faces a fiscal crisis severe enough, when the debt grows large enough, when the options narrow to a small enough number, it reaches for the largest, most visible, most accessible pool of capital within its administrative control. And in the modern economy, that pool is your pension. Not because your government is uniquely corrupt, not because your politicians are uniquely dishonest, but because the math eventually requires it. And because the structure of pension systems, the way they are built, the way they are registered, the way they are held, makes them the most technically accessible form of middle-class wealth that exists. This is not theory. This is a documented pattern that has repeated with mechanical consistency across Weimar Germany, Argentina, Hungary, Bulgaria, Bolivia, Ireland, Portugal, France, and Poland. It is repeating right now in slow motion in countries whose citizens are confident it cannot happen to them. Before we can understand how pension systems fail, we need to understand what a pension actually is. Because most people who contribute to one have never thought carefully about this question. They assume the answer is obvious. A pension is my retirement savings. It is my money set aside for the future. That assumption is wrong in ways that matter enormously. A pension is a promise. It is a contractual obligation made by an institution, whether a government, a corporation, or a fund manager, to pay you a specified amount of money at a specified future date in exchange for contributions made today. What makes that definition important is what it contains and what it does not contain. It contains an obligation. It does not contain the money itself. When you contribute to a state pension system, you are not depositing money into a vault with your name on it. You are paying a tax in exchange for a promise. The money you pay today funds the payments of retirees today. The promise extended to you is that future workers will fund your payments when your turn comes. This is called a pay-as-you-go system, and it is the structure underlying. The system works when there are enough workers paying in to cover the retirees drawing out. It struggles when that ratio changes. It breaks when a government is simultaneously running large deficits, facing demographic contraction, and carrying debt levels that require an ever-growing share of tax revenue just to service the interest. Every one of those conditions exists today in most major developed economies. We will come back to that. Even in private pension systems, the kind established precisely to avoid the fragility of pay-as-you-go, the promise structure remains. A defined benefit pension promises you a specific monthly payment at retirement, regardless of what the underlying investments have done. A defined contribution plan promises to invest your contributions on your behalf and deliver whatever the markets produce. In both cases, the promise depends on the continued solvency of the institution making it, the continued integrity of the regulatory framework governing it, and the continued stability of the currency in which it is denominated. Remove any one of those three conditions. The promise becomes noise. And here is what every major economic collapse in the past 100 years has demonstrated. The conditions that preserve pension promises are exactly the conditions that economic crises destroy. Solvency disappears. Regulatory frameworks are rewritten. Currencies debase. All three simultaneously. The promise remains on paper. The value behind it evaporates. And the person holding the paper discovers too late that the paper was the only thing they ever actually owned. Let's go through the documented cases, not as theory, as autopsy. The first case is the one that established the template. Germany, 1921 to 1923. Before the First World War, Germany had one of the most sophisticated pension systems in the world. Otto von Bismarck had introduced state old age insurance in 1889, making Germany the first nation on earth to implement a formal government pension scheme. By 1914, German workers and civil servants had been contributing to state pension funds for 25 years. The system was considered a model of modern social organization. It was administered efficiently. It was backed by the full faith and credit of the German state. It was denominated in marks. You already know what happened to the marks. Between 1921 and November 1923, the German mark lost approximately 99.999999% of its value. The exchange rate moved from roughly 90 marks per dollar in 1921 to 4.2 trillion marks per dollar by November 1923. A pension that paid 800 marks per month in 1920, enough to live on comfortably, paid 800 marks per month in 1923. The payment was honored exactly as promised. The amount never changed. The purchasing power of that amount fell to a figure so close to zero that the mathematical difference between it and nothing was not worth calculating. German pensioners stood in line at the post office to collect their payments. They collected them. They walked across the street and discovered the payment could not buy a newspaper. No one stole the pension. No one raided the fund. No law was broken. No official acted improperly. The pension was honored to the letter of its contract. The contract simply promised marks, and marks became meaningless. The government did not need to seize the pension funds because it had something more efficient available. It printed the currency those funds were denominated in into oblivion. The effect was identical to seizure. The mechanism was different. The outcome for the retired school teacher, the retired postal worker, the retired civil servant who had contributed faithfully for decades was the same. Nothing. This is the first method. Currency debasement. The government does not take your pension. It takes the value of your pension. The number remains. The reality behind the number disappears. And because it happens gradually, because the process takes months and years rather than a single dramatic moment, most people do not understand what is happening until it is complete. The second case is Argentina. And Argentina is worth examining in detail because it demonstrates not one method of pension destruction, but two, deployed within a single decade by the same government. In 1994, Argentina introduced a private pension reform. Workers were given the option to move their contributions from the state pension system into private accounts managed by licensed fund administrators called AFJPs. The reform was celebrated internationally. It was modeled on the Chilean system, which had been praised by economists and financial institutions as a blueprint for sustainable retirement security. It gave workers ownership, real accounts, real balances, real fund statements. By 2001, Argentina's currency crisis had arrived. The peso, pegged to the dollar at parity, collapsed. Banks were frozen. The economy contracted by nearly 11% in a single year.